At Miami International Airport, amid the bustling crowd, a black female soldier in full uniform was stopped right in front of the check-in counter. She had broken no rules, carried no prohibited items, and her documents were in order. Yet instead of being assisted, she was denied boarding, with no clear explanation. She didn't shout, didn't protest. She simply stood still, her gaze steady, gripping the leather case that held her deployment orders. And then, within minutes, the entire terminal became the center of the nation's attention. No one could have predicted that this seemingly ordinary moment would spark a media firestorm, a story that would ignite public outrage, compel the silent to speak up, and force an entire system to bow its head. What really happened, and who is this woman, truly? The main hall of Miami International Airport echoed with flight announcements. Streams of people flowed toward the check-in counters, forming a chaotic yet familiar sea of movement. Families dragged suitcases big and small, children chattered and ran circles around their parents. Business travelers spoke rapidly on their phones, Bluetooth earpieces in place, eyes flicking to their watches as if time might escape them. The atmosphere was hectic, noisy, and no one seemed to care about anything beyond their own journey. Amid that scene, one figure stood out. Lieutenant Danielle Hayes, a black woman with a calm face and unshaken posture, walked slowly across the polished floor. She wore a crisp military uniform, medals glinting under the yellow lights. On her left shoulder was a black ribbon, a symbol of military mourning. In her hand, an old dark brown leather case, worn by time, filled with military documents, passport, and urgent deployment orders. Every step she took was steady, as if she carried not just the weight of her luggage, but a heavier burden in her heart. Today, she wasn't going on vacation or visiting family. She was escorting a fallen comrade, Sergeant Nathaniel Brooks, age 26, who had been killed in an ambush in Ukraine, back home. His body, wrapped in the American flag, was currently stored in a special compartment of a waiting military aircraft. Danielle approached the Sky Continental check-in counter and waited quietly. No one among the hurried travelers noticed her. No one saw the beads of sweat forming on her temple, even though the air inside was cool. Only one person, a female employee at the counter, looked at her with unusual eyes. Becky, in her 30s, white, with a heavily made-up face and blonde hair tied up high. She closed her half-empty water bottle and cast a quick glance toward Danielle. Seeing the uniform and solemn expression, Becky flinched slightly. Her eyes moved over the black ribbon, then paused briefly on Danielle's face, a mix of suspicion and unease. Danielle gently placed the leather case on the counter, taking out the documents she had carefully prepared. Deployment orders with a red seal, confirmation from the Department of Defense, military ID. Everything was neatly arranged inside a transparent plastic folder. Becky took it, her hands a bit slow. A wrinkle formed at the corner of her eye as she looked down at the documents. She frowned, though it wasn't clear if it was from fatigue or something else. "What flight are you on?" Becky asked, her voice just above a whisper. "Flight 628, to St. Louis," Danielle answered, calmly, as if she had rehearsed that line in her mind many times. Becky didn't reply, simply turned to the computer and began typing. The clacking of keys rang out amid the background noise. But when the system response appeared on the screen, Becky paused for a moment. It was brief, barely noticeable to an outsider, but for someone as experienced as Danielle, that pause stretched like a silent warning. Becky tilted her head, frowned more deeply, then turned to the colleague beside her. She didn't say much, only whispered a few short words. The young man, brown-haired, wearing a name tag that read Tyler, glanced over. He didn't respond, only squinted and shrugged, as if to say, "Your call." Danielle saw it all, but didn't react. She wasn't surprised, nor was she in a rush. Her expression remained unchanged, feet planted firmly, hand resting lightly on the bag handle. Her eyes focused, her breathing steady, her whole being composed like someone trained to wait for orders. She had prepared for this moment all week. She knew not everyone would understand the meaning of such a journey. And not everyone was used to seeing a black woman in uniform, carrying out a solemn mission in a civilian setting like this. Becky returned after several minutes of struggling with the system. She placed the folder back on the counter, her face now devoid of friendliness. Her lips pressed tightly together, eyes cold. There was no apology, no softness at all. "There's a system error," Becky said flatly, her tone nearly emotionless. "You won't be able to fly today." Danielle tilted her head slightly. She didn't seem surprised, only stayed silent for a breath, then calmly picked up the documents again. She opened her leather case and took out another copy of the deployment order, along with a confirmation from the command office. Everything bore red stamps, signatures, and encrypted verification codes. She placed them back on the counter, her voice still calm and clear. "I'm assigned to escort a fallen service member. This flight is scheduled through military logistics. My documents are valid." Becky didn't check them immediately. Instead, she took a deep breath, leaned closer toward Danielle, lowering her voice but tightening with tension. "I can't verify your identity. These papers aren't recognized by the system. They don't match the airline's information." Her eyes darted from the screen to Danielle, then briefly scanned her uniform. Her brows furrowed, lifting slightly, as if she were restraining herself from saying more. Danielle didn't frown, didn't push back. She simply observed, then replied softly but firmly, "These documents were issued by the Pentagon. Each assignment is verified through 2 levels of command and the Flight Coordination Office. There's nothing wrong here." Becky stepped back half a pace. She was beginning to lose patience. Her hands planted on the counter, her voice now sharper, though still controlled. "You could be anyone. I can't let a stranger board a flight based on a few sheets of red stamped paper. Please don't pressure us." A few passengers in line started to glance over, curious about the exchange. Tyler, Becky's colleague, raised an eyebrow but stayed silent. The air around the counter suddenly tightened like a stretched wire. At that moment, a middle-aged man in a gray suit approached. His hair was streaked with silver, his face tired but sharp. The name tag on his chest read, "Craig Benson, Zone A Supervisor." He didn't smile, didn't greet. He gave Becky a small nod, then quickly glanced toward Danielle. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice low, steady, and serious. Becky leaned in to whisper to Craig, pointing at the documents. Craig nodded, picked them up, schemed them for a few seconds, then set them down. "We have to follow security protocols," he said to Danielle. His tone didn't carry apology, more like a final decision already made. Danielle didn't rush to respond. She leaned slightly toward him, eyes fixed on his without wavering. "What protocols, exactly?" "I've flown multiple times on similar missions. Same type of documents. Same verification format. Never once had an issue." Craig didn't answer immediately. He exhaled softly, tapped his fingers on the counter a few times, then looked up at her. His gaze flickered, then quickly turned away. He glanced down at her uniform, paused for a moment at the row of medals. No words came. But that silence said more than anything else. In his eyes was an unmistakable unease. And behind his careful demeanor, a quiet look of someone unconsciously guided by bias. No one spoke. But in that moment, Danielle knew this fight wasn't about documents or policies. It was about the way they saw her, not as an officer on duty, but as someone not worthy of trust. Craig stood across from Danielle, his eyes scanning her. First, they landed on her pressed uniform, the neatly arranged medals over her left chest. Then, he looked down at her well-polished shoes and the leather case in her hand. But eventually, his gaze settled on something else, something he didn't try to hide, her deep brown skin and the tightly coiled hair gathered neatly at the nape of her neck. He didn't say a word, but his eyes said enough, suspicion not rooted in paperwork, but in the person standing before him. Danielle felt it clearly. She had seen that look before, more than once. And she knew, this time was no different. They weren't seeing her as a soldier on duty. They were seeing her as someone who didn't belong, someone unfit to be trusted. She stayed silent, but inside, a heavy note began to sink deeper. From behind, a low murmur began to rise. A few passengers quietly turned their heads. A woman tugged her husband's sleeve, pointing toward Danielle. A young man pulled out his phone, opening the camera app. Some didn't yet know what was happening, but everyone could feel something wasn't right. Craig cleared his throat. He looked at Danielle, lips tightening into a thin line, then spoke slowly, as if measuring every word, "You may have flown before, but today is an exception." The words, though calmly said, struck like a cold slap. Danielle heard them without flinching. Her gaze remained steady. She knew exactly what was going on, and it wasn't about any so-called exception. She stepped forward once, her voice calm but firm. "I request to speak with a higher supervisor, someone authorized to make the final decision in this matter." Craig shook his head, almost immediately. "That's not necessary. I'm the one in charge of this area." A firm answer. No room for negotiation. Behind him, a young employee in a dark blue uniform leaned down and whispered something. The voice was soft, but Danielle heard it clearly. "She's just trying to make a scene." Craig didn't react. No one did. That kind of comment seemed normal here. Danielle didn't turn her head, didn't question it, didn't push back. She simply looked straight into Craig's eyes. Her gaze held no anger, but something stronger, a silent assertion that she would not back down. A few meters away, an older man began to pay closer attention. He wore a faded olive military jacket, a worn navy emblem stitched on the chest. His hair was white, but his eyes still sharp. He said nothing, just quietly watched Danielle, and in his gaze was something familiar, something that recognized her, and perhaps even a flicker of emotion, like an old memory rising quietly to the surface. The first voice came softly from the left side of the check-in counter, where an elderly couple stood waiting in line. The woman, dressed in a beige sweater and light silk scarf, leaned toward her husband, her voice low with surprise. "She's in uniform, what are they doing to her?" The husband didn't respond right away. He stepped forward half a pace, squinting to see better. On his head was an old, faded olive green cap, the letters USMC, United States Marine Corps, barely visible with time. His eyes settled on Danielle, standing tall in her crisp uniform, leather case clutched in hand. Without hesitation, he spoke clearly and firmly. "She's a soldier, no doubt about it." Amid the airport's noisy chaos, his words seemed to ripple outward, replaced by a new kind of silence, not empty, but filled with attention, with eyes locking onto a growing disturbance. People around began to turn their heads. They saw Danielle still standing in place. In front of her was Craig, eyes tight, phone in hand, speaking rapidly. Craig ended the call with a quick nod, his gaze still fixed on Danielle. He had contacted security. It seemed he wanted to shut this down before it grew any bigger. But he was already too late. A young woman with a red backpack near the information pillar quietly took out her phone. She didn't say a word, simply opened her camera and hit record. Moments later, a young man in a gray hoodie launched a Facebook live stream. The frame was a bit shaky but unmistakable, a black female soldier being held back, not allowed to board. The air in the terminal grew heavy. Questions began to emerge. A young guy in his 20s, hair dyed light, looked around and asked loudly, "What's going on? Are they stopping a soldier from boarding? The question sparked like dry grass catching fire. Those who hadn't noticed before now turned their heads. Some whispered, others just watched. More phones rose in the air. No one laughed. No one joked. Craig stepped forward half a pace, his tone firmer. Ma'am, please step away from the line. This is a matter requiring separate handling. Danielle didn't react. She didn't look around or back away. Her gaze stayed locked on the counter, which an hour earlier was just a check-in point like any other. Now, it was a front line, between her and a system slowly revealing its true face. None of the staff offered a clear reason. They kept repeating the same tired phrase, for security reasons. A safe excuse. A familiar escape route. What they didn't anticipate was that their actions were no longer invisible. Observation had outgrown their control. Tension spread with each passing second. Every eye fixed on Danielle asked the same unspoken question: why was a soldier, in uniform, on a mission to escort a fallen comrade, being treated like someone unworthy of trust? Amid the sea of people, beneath the glow of phone screens capturing every moment, Danielle still stood her ground. Silent, but powerful. And to a crowd slowly waking up, her silence was the loudest voice in the room. The air in the terminal grew thicker by the minute. The once curious glances had turned into focused attention. Then, the silence that had stretched so long was finally broken by the man in the USMC cap, the old veteran who had been standing quietly near the counter. He stepped forward, slow but steady, eyes sharp and locked onto Craig. His voice was low, clear, not loud, but it froze the entire space in an instant. Is there a problem verifying her military credentials? Craig flinched slightly, clearly not expecting the man to speak up. He glanced quickly at Danielle, then turned back to the veteran, trying to maintain composure in posture and voice. No, it's just an internal procedure, Craig replied, his eyes blinking more than usual, as if avoiding something. The old soldier tilted his head, his face tightening. He spoke each word deliberately, slowly, as if making sure everyone in the terminal could hear. I've flown for years, both during service and after. I've never seen a soldier held back like this. Not when they're on duty. His words cut through the tension like a blade. A few people nodded. Some whispered to each other. Agreement began to spread. Danielle remained still, showing no sign of emotion, though her gaze seemed to deepen. She lifted her chin, stared directly at Craig. Her voice was calm, but every syllable carried the weight of honor. I won't leave until my mission is complete. It wasn't just a statement. It was a declaration, shaped by loss, by battles fought, and now, by the sting of being questioned not because of any mistake, but because of something deeper. To the right side of the terminal, a young woman stood near the flight info pillar, her phone already recording. She raised it higher, aiming directly at Danielle. Her eyes burned with righteous anger. The whole country needs to see this, she said loudly, nearly shouting, I'm filming right now. She wasn't alone. A young man near the corridor started live streaming. Then a mother holding a baby. Then a guy in a sports jacket. Within seconds, 5 or 6 phones were raised, every lens focused on Danielle, on Craig, on a confrontation spiraling out of control. Craig began to unravel. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket, dabbing his forehead slowly. His shirt back showed dampness. His eyes darted quickly across the phones filming, then back to Danielle, to the veteran, to the young woman with fire in her eyes. He turned toward Becky, but she had already looked away, eyes fixed on her keyboard, fingers typing without aim. Tyler stood awkwardly at the counter's edge, his face pale. Every scenario Craig had imagined was crumbling. No one was in control anymore. Then, a voice rang out from near the security gate. A boy holding his phone, eyes glued to the screen, called out with a mix of awe and excitement, Hashtag Letterfly is trending right now. The words hit like a final alarm bell. It wasn't just about going viral. It was proof the story had escaped the walls of the airport, slipped through every camera lens, and entered the spotlight of national scrutiny. And now, no one here could stop it. Just minutes after the first phones were raised, social media began to stir. A short, weighty tweet started appearing on thousands of screens. Black female lieutenant denied flight while escorting fallen soldier. Is this how America treats its heroes? Beneath the tweet was a close-up photo of Danielle standing firm at the check-in counter, eyes locked on Craig, with a crowd behind her filming and taking pictures. Moments later, the official account of a major veterans organization shared the post. Their statement came with a sharp warning: "We will take action. No soldier should be humiliated while on duty. Not today, not ever." Craig still had no idea what was unfolding. That is, until his phone rang. He quickly pulled it out, scanned the screen, and froze. An emergency call from the airline's internal communications division. He brought the phone to his ear, his face tightening, the calm he wore earlier now visibly cracking. After only a few brief words from the other end, his complexion paled, and his eyes lost their steadiness. He responded with a single, dry phrase: "I understand." At that very moment, the atmosphere around the counter shattered. A female employee who had just stepped out of the back room saw the crowd filming. Silently, she removed her name tag, leaned toward Becky, and said, "I'm taking a break." Becky nodded without looking up. Within seconds, 2 more staff members quietly slipped away from their posts. No one wanted their face captured in this moment. No one wanted to be associated with what was spreading like wildfire. At the far end of the terminal, a mother was calming a baby in her arms. The child whimpered softly, but the mother didn't notice. Her eyes stayed fixed on her phone screen, holding the camera steady. Her voice trembled slightly but remained clear: "This is truly shameful. A country like ours, and we let this happen right in our airport." That sentence struck like a match. A man in a white dress shirt, standing near the flight info board, suddenly shouted, "Let her fly, she's a soldier." His voice echoed through the terminal. Some clapped. Others picked up the chant like a rallying cry. Those who had once stood silent could stay silent no longer. Craig turned to call for security, but before he could speak, a security staffer approached and handed him a phone already open. Craig took it and looked down. The screen showed NBC News's homepage. A bold headline scrolled across: "U.S. Lieutenant denied flight while escorting fallen soldier, Sky Continental has yet to respond." Below it was a still from the now viral video: Danielle's calm yet resolute face surrounded by the chaotic crowd. Craig handed the phone back, his hand trembling slightly. He knew the situation had spiraled far beyond his control. What he and his team had tried to contain had now exploded into a public storm, tearing through every barrier they'd put up. The story was no longer in his hands. It wasn't in the airline's hands anymore. It had broken free, and was sweeping across the nation, a silent accusation that needed no defense. Craig stepped back slightly, his hand trembling as he adjusted his collar. Sweat dotted his forehead, and his eyes scanned the terminal as if searching for a way out of a situation slipping beyond control. His voice caught in his throat before he finally spoke, thin and unconvincing: This is just a technical misunderstanding. A verification issue." But no one responded. The terminal fell into silence. Only the clack of a distant keyboard and the faint announcements from the airport speakers remained. Danielle stood there, unmoved, unwavering. She looked at Craig, her eyes not angry, but filled with quiet, profound disappointment. She asked, her voice steady and clear, low but unmistakably commanding, "If no one spoke up today, would I still be standing here waiting?" That question wasn't aimed at just one person. It was for everyone. For Craig, for the staff avoiding eye contact, for the passengers now watching her. It wasn't merely a question. It was a mirror held up to their conscience. Another pause. Then from the right side of the terminal, a voice rang out, strong and clear, "Let her fly." Another followed, then another, and soon the entire hall echoed like a sudden chorus born from shared outrage, "Let her fly, let her fly." The chant roared through the wide space. Those who had been bystanders were no longer watching from the sidelines. They were standing with her now. Craig blinked rapidly, his lips pressed tightly as he tried to keep his composure, but he couldn't hide his desperation. He turned to Danielle, one last effort glinting in his eyes. "We can upgrade you to first class, on the next flight," he said, voice lowered, as if bargaining, as if plush seats could soften the weight of injustice. Danielle didn't hesitate. "No thanks." No forced smile. Her answer came instantly, firm, each word striking like a slap to Craig's hollow offer, "I don't need first class. I need respect." Her gaze didn't flinch. She wasn't asking for compensation. She was demanding recognition, as a soldier on duty, as a human being. Just then, a man wearing a media jacket and press badge stepped swiftly into the crowd. He held a microphone, followed by a cameraman with gear slung over his shoulder. "I'm Marcus from Channel 4. Lieutenant Hayes, would you be willing to say a few words to the public?" His tone was professional, but urgency threaded through his words. Danielle turned her head, looked at him for a second, then back to Craig. She didn't answer. But her eyes spoke volumes. Everything they needed to know, they had already seen. The crowd began to speak up on their own. A silver-haired woman, eyes wet with emotion, called out, "We stand with her." A young father pushing a stroller nodded, "No one deserves to be treated like this." A college student raised his phone high, filming, and shouted, "Is this the America we want?" Each voice added fuel to the fire already burning. No more doubt. No more hesitation. The once silent had chosen their side. And then, just as the tension peaked, a figure appeared from the hallway beside the terminal. Tall, in crisp military uniform, rank insignia gleaming on his shoulders. He walked with purpose, each step firm, his eyes sharp and unflinching. No words were needed. Everyone understood. This man wasn't here to ask questions. He was here to end it. A side door at the terminal swung open. A tall man in high-ranking military uniform entered, his strides firm and deliberate. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The entire area seemed to pause. The chatter, the shouting, the murmurs, all faded in a matter of seconds. On his shoulders, the insignia of a colonel. On his chest, rows of medals. His face was stern, his eyes sharp and unwavering, showing no hesitation in front of the crowd filming, live streaming, questioning. This was Colonel Richard Mason. Without hesitation, he walked directly toward Danielle. The crowd parted instinctively to make way. Some froze, others furrowed their brows, unsure of what was unfolding. Craig stood motionless, stunned. Danielle, upon seeing the man, straightened even more, her grip loosening on the leather briefcase, a flicker of light appearing in her eyes. Colonel Mason stopped in front of her, extended his hand, and clasped hers firmly. His voice was low and steady, "Lieutenant Hayes, you acted correctly. Command acknowledges your resolve and integrity in this situation." The entire terminal froze. Craig's jaw dropped. Becky stepped back, her lips trembling slightly, eyes wide in disbelief. Tyler muttered something unintelligible, unable to form actual words. No one could have imagined that the woman they just held back at the counter would be addressed as ma'am by a United States Army colonel. A second later, whispers rippled through the space like waves. Some people asked quietly, others gasped out loud. The phone's recording began slowly panning back toward Danielle, as if everyone needed a moment of confirmation to believe what they were witnessing. Colonel Mason didn't linger. He turned toward the crowd and declared with composed authority, "She will not be flying commercial. A military aircraft is waiting at the VIP terminal. This is a high-priority mission, authorized by the Pentagon." As his words ended, the crowd erupted. Some let out sighs of relief, others widened their eyes, a few tilted their heads as if suddenly piecing everything together. They hadn't just witnessed a confrontation. They had witnessed a grave mistake by the airline. And now, they were seeing the undeniable consequences of bias and disregard. Craig turned pale. His hands trembled slightly, eyes glued to the floor, as if looking for somewhere to hide. No one needed to point out who was at fault. His silence answered everything. Danielle did not look smug. She didn't smile in victory, didn't glance toward those who had doubted or mistreated her. She simply bowed her head slightly to those around her. A short gesture, but full of meaning. She remained herself. A lieutenant, a soldier, fulfilling her duty to the very end. No applause needed. No apologies demanded. Just the quiet confirmation that what was right had finally been acknowledged. Just a few hours after the incident at the airport, Sky Continental Airlines issued an official statement. In it, they wrote, "A system error, we apologize for the unfortunate incident this morning. The passenger affected was a service member on a sacred duty. We commit to reviewing our internal procedures." The apology, written in dry administrative language, was posted on their website and social media platforms. But to the public, every word came too late. Trust had already cracked. The company's reputation had slipped through their fingers during what should have been a routine morning. Immediately after, veteran organizations spoke out in unison. From the Marine Corps Association to the Retired Military Officers Federation, all called for an internal investigation. They demanded clarity about the real cause, not vague corporate excuses. They wanted justice for Danielle, and for all service members who had silently endured discrimination. Craig and Becky, the staff directly involved in the incident, were suspended pending investigation. The airline announced a review of their conduct, as well as an assessment of potential bias in how the situation was handled. But for the public, suspension was only the beginning. What they demanded was accountability, not just from employees, but from the entire system that allowed this to happen. Footage of the incident spread like wildfire across social media. On TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, millions of shares, hundreds of thousands of comments. Short clips showing Danielle standing silently amid a circle of prejudice left many viewers deeply moved. Netizens weren't just talking. They were furious. The hashtag #Letherfly became a symbol. Within less than 24 hours, it appeared everywhere, from posts by celebrities and politicians to calls from military communities. It was no longer just a slogan. It was a wake-up call. A reminder of what must never be allowed to happen again. Sky Continental's stock plummeted. Investors panicked. The media pressed for answers. That same afternoon, the airline CEO was forced to hold an emergency press conference. He bowed his head in front of the cameras, reading a prepared statement, "We deeply regret. This incident is a wake-up call for our entire system to change." But those words could not erase what had already happened. As for Danielle, after completing all procedures with her military team, she quietly exited the airport through a private corridor. She made no statements. Answered no questions. Left no comment behind. Just as a soldier often chooses silence, once the truth speaks loud enough on its own. And though she said nothing, the public's heart had not settled. The lesson remained, echoing not just through the halls of Miami International Airport, but across the nation. That respect is not something to be begged for, nor fixed by apology. And that justice sometimes begins with the smallest voice, raised at just the right moment, in just the right place. Respect is not something that needs to be begged for, it is something that should be granted by default, especially to those who wear the uniform of their country, who quietly sacrifice and protect without needing to be named. A small action, like speaking up at an airport, like recording a moment of injustice, can become the spark that drives a much larger change. Courage isn't always found on the front lines, sometimes it lies in choosing to stand on the side of what's right, even in everyday life. Lieutenant Danielle Hayes didn't ask for pity. She didn't need praise. She didn't want special treatment. What she needed was recognition, an unprejudiced gaze, and to be treated with the respect due to someone carrying out a sacred duty. And this time, the world spoke up in time. Not too late. Not with silence. Not by turning away, as it so often had before. If you believe in justice, don't stay silent. Because silence is what allows injustice to grow roots. It's what lets wrongdoing repeat itself like it's normal. If this story made you think, share it. Leave a comment below. And if you want to keep following meaningful stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe. Because maybe, just maybe, your action today could be the voice someone needs tomorrow.